Hello, welcome back to another Cup of TCG video, a second one in the space of 2 weeks. Who'd have thunk it? I am back with local brute professional Toby Beckham. How's it going, Toby?
It's going good. It's going good. I don't know about professional, but it's going good.
We are going to take a look at Toby's early heavy hitters brew for none other than the man himself, Rhinar. Um, bit of trepidation when Rhinar was revealed as one of our two new brute heroes in heavy hitters, but hey, Rhiner's got some new toys, and I'm pretty interested to see what Toby's cooked up.
New toys is definitely the good way of putting it. He does have a lot of brand new toys, some of which may be immediately thrown out of the pram. We'll see. But some other ones are really something to write home about, and I'm really hoping, well, to do them justice in a deck like this one.
Let's go. Right, let's take a look at the deck. Transition. First initial impressions, Toby. Equipment suite looking pretty standard to your Rhinar deck techs of the past, with one notable new face. Apex Bonebreaker. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll be the first or the last person to say that this piece of equipment is pretty good. Obviously, I don't know if we've mentioned it anyone else, or if anyone else has seen anything about it, but it does represent a lot of value for a single card and a single equipment piece at that. Obviously, having the 2 temper is obviously the 3 block, and those 2 might tokens, if you can make them, obviously can also present 2 offensive power too. So a value of 5 in our well-known brute maths, which is
Yeah, really, really strong. Obviously, the inclusion of Apex Bonebreaker does leave Gamblers Gloves seemingly on the chopping block. It's pretty sad to say goodbye to them, huh? I see they're in your sideboard. What's the choice there?
yeah, they're in the back pocket. Illusionists do still exist, and as you were saying to me off the video a little while ago, there are some matchups I think where the gloves probably do still come out when you don't necessarily need that extra block and maybe even the might tokens from the bone breakers, and sometimes just pushing those usually quite silly 13 plus damage turns really consistently that you can do with the gambler's gloves is kind of makes them worth it. But
Yeah,
obviously, this is
100%.
still a really early draft. Like I've barely got 20 games of this on Talishar so far,
Hmm.
and obviously no real practice in paper. So as it stands, this is where I am. Obviously, this is subject to change, but obviously, I think it feels pretty strong. Hence why we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose we skipped over a little bit. It is a clause Rhinar deck, so it's your traditional sort of Blood Rush game plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is very much a list which goes by that brute maths. Like I said before, you're quite happy to block 6, present 6 until you set up those blood rush turns. And you're only ever really happy to pull the trigger on those blood rushes when you're thinking that you're really pushing those high damage, yeah, blood rush turns. So we're looking for 18s minimum, really. Like
Yeah,
16 is kind of like I say the low end of
yeah.
a blood rush. We want those 18s, and obviously now the potential to hit 20 as we used to do with swing bigs and even more with a few new toys as well.
And one of those toys I think you might be hinting towards is Rana's new specialization that I see is in the list, 3 Show No Mercy. Give us a little rundown on this one.
Yeah, there's a reason the deck's named after it. I have seen some differing opinions on the card and obviously just what it brings to the table for Rhiner. But as a man who deeply loves his pitch deck in a deck like Rhiner, this is a gift from high above for finishing games from seemingly out of nowhere. This is a card that can very much have your opponent at 15 and wrap up the game for you in a singular turn. Obviously, by virtue of its well costed and very efficient card text, especially after you've just hit them twice with claws on a blood rush 10.
Yeah, for sure. So this card, tends to be, more often than not, seems to be a 2 card. Well, obviously you've got to set up some form of intimidate or some reason for them to block before, but a 3 for 9 that intimidates when it swings. That's That's pretty big. Pretty good, nice numbers on that card there.
Exactly. Well, it's an alpha rampage without the discard, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and only the one intimidate, implying we're not discarding a 6 on the alpha. But don't worry, alpha rampage is still there as well.
Yeah, yeah, I see Alpha Rampage still in the list, along with other notable reds, Savage Feast, Swing Big, your sort of mainstays. You got the red barraging beatdowns in there. Not always present in Blood Rush builds. What's the thought here?
So it is just because of that Show No Mercy and also the other Brute Majestic that we did pick up in this set as well. Obviously, a 3-card grip of a blue, a Show No Mercy, and a Barraging Beatdown does present this sort of ultimatum to your opponent of a Show No Mercy for 10, or a Show No Mercy for 9, and they're blocked with the 2 cards in hand, right? Because if they're blocking with
Yeah,
those 2 cards, following the 2 intimidates, they're left with no cards. So it's like, cool, but you can take a lot of damage and keep your 4-card grip, or you can take a little bit of damage and keep your 2-card grip. Regardless, you're taking damage. And obviously, in the early game, it doesn't mean too much, especially into a deck that's quite aggro. But in the late game, if your opponent's on 2, that's a pretty good way of wrapping up a game.
yeah, 100%. And I suppose this is the sort of Rhinar staple at this point. Non-traditional disruption with intimidate and the hand disruption, and forcing your opponents into some real awkward blocking choices to be made. Another red you're including in here, which I mean it's a bit of a mainstay at this point. Savage Feast, amazing card, really good in your club builds. Not playing Gambler's Gloves alongside it this time though.
Yeah, so obviously Savage Feast is one of those cards in Rhino that has always been very low floor, very high ceiling, right? Because obviously with that second action point, suddenly you're unlocking a whole turn of 6 into 3 if you're lucky, a 12-point turn
Yep.
off of 3 cards, 3 card 12. It's not obviously that's brute mass, it's not bad. It's no 5 turn, but we'll
Yeah,
take it.
it's with an
With the
intim as well.
Intimidate as well. Exactly. But obviously, it was always you'd have to risk that scab skin roll, right? You'd
Yeah,
get to look at that grip. You have to maybe have Arsenal that Savage Feast and go, am I going to leak some damage here to potentially present 12 or present 6 and
yeah,
reset my Arsenal? So in a deck like this, where I mean, I'd say Savage Feast shines even more, right? Because we have more consistent ways of guaranteeing that go again. We have the agile windups. And we have obviously that sideboard piece when we get to it as well, take it on the chin to make those agility tokens.
just the last red I want to talk about here that was also featured in the deck in yellow, Agile Wind Up, new card from Heavy Hitters.
Yeah.
Seems to be making its way into all flavors of brute lists.
Yeah, and for good reason. Obviously, ignore the 2 in the bottom right. It is well worth the one less on the block
Yeah,
to justify playing, as you see here, 2 play sets of the card. I've bounced around the 3 reds, maybe 2 to 3 reds. We'll see where we eventually end up. The yellows, for sure, are going to be staples going forward in all the brute decks, for reference, probably instead of riled up yellow. Um,
yeah. I mean, we've joked a lot before about which filler yellow six you take in these sorts of lists, right? And I have a personal disdain for rolled up yellow. I tend to pick Savage Swing, but not particularly happy about having to play either of them. But I mean, Agile Wind Up Yellow seems like a real high performer in that slot now.
It really is. So obviously at its floor, it is a 3 cost attack for 6, and obviously it does block 2, so it is marginally worse in that regard. But obviously at its floor, at the end of a blood rush, if you've got your finals up and you've played it somewhat safely, you're looking at a 5 on a claw, 5 on a claw into an 8 on an agile wind up, and that's not the end of the world really. Obviously 9 if you're throwing the red at them,
Yeah,
but
9 on the red.
that's not what we really want the card for. We want the card because that agility token is what makes a lot of these pretty good, decent, fair, almost Rhino turns turn into quite unfair, quite
Yeah,
over the top, and sometimes quite egregious turns instead. And obviously, by virtue of Rhino's ability, it also works as a there you go, there's the agility token. Go again. Pretty
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Pretty good. But obviously, by virtue of Reiner's inbuilt ability of course, discarding a 6 during your action phase, it doesn't matter when you do it. Doesn't matter if you do it in the layer step on blocks. If you do it as you move to reactions, that Intimidate is going on the stack, and
Mm.
you can use it to really do some sort of like combat trick shenanigans that Rhino hasn't really had access to before.
Really, really versatile card. I mean, like we spoke about, it turns claws on as well. So you can have a handful of blues, and you can even go discard a wind up, claw, swing big. I mean, that's like a mini blood rush turn,
You,
right?
you can, and let me tell you, it happens a fair bit.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, I'm not surprised.
other iterations of this list that try and incorporate more two-cost attacks for exactly that sort of thing, where you're quite happy to go, I'll keep a grip like that, because yeah, turning on those claws is so easy, and obviously that Intimidate can't be overstated. It really can ruin some blocking. If you get that D-react,
Yeah,
you're looking pretty good.
yeah,
And again, sometimes you can just throw out a mandible claw, holding your wind up in hand, and let them deal with it. And then obviously, if you want to give the go again, you can. Sometimes you can just bluff it too.
yeah,
If you get
yeah,
into the habit of never using your wind up until after they've declared blocks, sometimes it is just a D-react, but you might be able to
yeah.
bait something out of them.
You mentioned something there. I wanna touch on as a bit of an interesting deck building choice here. A lot of three-cost attacks in this deck. And traditionally, we've seen the need for two-cost attacks to be at the end of your blood rush. How do the three-cost attacks impact your ability to blood rush?
Substantially, I think it's one of those things where it does feel tough. Like this list does already, the limit testing I've done, you do feel the lack of all things red pack hunt.
Yeah,
You do feel the lack of it, just as that extra sort of contingency planned for your end game and stuff. And while we do have obviously like the yellow reincarnates, and when we get there, the yellow send packings. Like you said, they cost 3. And it means you just have to be really, really vigilant, very disciplined on your blood rushes. You need to be
yeah.
well aware that you need to have that finals up, and you need to sometimes go, okay, well, you know what, this turn isn't the turn. We're going to block out and push it next turn for a turn where you can keep your blue, you can keep 2 6s in hand, and know you're going to have those extra resources.
We joke about it a lot at our local store, and the ongoing meme being that Brute is a real cerebral class, but this deck, it really it shouts that it's trying to be a little bit more calculated with the blood rushes to me. It's really waiting for the big payoff. So blood rush is nothing new, right? You might
Precisely.
have to approach it a little bit differently, but blood rush is the game plan. It always kind of has been, other than in your club builds. But something that is new is send packing, and I think we all kind of had a similar reaction when we saw this card. Talk to me about this one.
So we already know that one of Reiner's key weaknesses has always been his interaction or his lack thereof. One of the reasons that we love Swing Big so much is that obviously it's a ridiculously costed card, but also because it does incentivize some interaction from our opponent as an on miss. You know, if they
Yeah,
fully block it, they get a quicken token, which in some matchups is actually quite useful for them. Like throwing it into a Dorinthia, for example, can sometimes hold a fair risk.
yeah,
But we're well aware as brute players that's part of the deal, right? We
yeah,
kind of we've signed away on that, and then they send us packing. They tell us actually, guess what? You do have an on hit now, and it's a really good one at that.
yeah, yeah,
It is a card that can ruin any intention to block out a barraging beatdown turn with a D react from Arsenal, or setting up a Lumina in Arsenal, or setting up anything in Arsenal, because it banishes it face up. We get to
yeah,
see exactly what you're trying to do.
yeah,
And then obviously threaten with that on hit. Now, in terms of the numbers itself, a 3 for 6 that blocks 3 is again very brute maths. It is, well, a smash instinct without the intimidate. It's a rolled up without the +1. And so into decks that want to block, blocking that 6 isn't usually too much of a hurdle, but it is a way to get 2 cards out of hand when otherwise we probably would have they would have tanked the 6, right?
yeah. And also, like we spoke about, you mentioned very briefly earlier, this could come in for 7 with the might token made from Apex Bonebreaker, right?
Exactly. And this and your command and conquers are what you want to be using your might tokens on.
Yeah,
I've had a few builds, like I said, I've been in the kitchen. What can I say? Where mighty wind up has made its way into the list as well. Because sometimes just threatening that 7, threatening those little on hits in a deck that usually, well, hasn't really needed to,
yeah.
is just that extra level of of annoyance really that some decks just can't handle when the turn after or the turn before you're throwing 20 damage at them with 2 intimidate.
One big takeaway from me looking at this deck, um, compared to pre-heavy hitters is, I mean, the yellow 6 base seems to have improved drastically, right?
Yeah, Yeah, so we're still playing the same amount of yellows. We're still playing 15 yellows, which is something I think a lot of brute players have been on for a little while.
Mm.
Obviously, three of those are always Blood Rush, three of those are always Beast Within. And the other ones have kind of varied around. Like I was on three Reincarnate, three Smash Instinct, and three Wild Up Yellow for the
Yeah,
longest time. Those were my staples, my ride or dies, and they did a lot of good work. However, I wouldn't say they've been power crept. There's definitely more utility in cards like
yeah.
Wind Up and Send Packing.
They're
Reincarnate sticks because of Reiner's inherent tendency to sort of grind himself into the dust. And so sometimes being able to stick another six on the bottom into your pitch deck, maybe next to a reckless swing, is something that can never
yeah.
be ignored.
So we've spoken about the reds, we've spoken about the yellows. I just want to highlight a couple of blues. I think we got some pretty standard, pretty traditional run-up blues, right? We got the blue barraging beat downs. You got the high rollers. You got a couple of reckless swings in there. Clearing below is like high roller 4, 5, and 6, right?
Pretty
And
much.
obviously you got your blue wreck romp, right?
Hmm.
Talk to me about dig up dinner and smashback Elhorn, which I see are both two of. Obviously, smashback Elhorn, the newest of the cards, but dig up dinner's an interesting card too. Talk to me about these ones.
Obviously, Smashback does block two. It is a two block, and I'm an avid, I want to say hater of two blocks, but I do like my three blocks. I like my efficient blocking. I like not leaking too much damage where I can. So for me to make the space for a card like this means that I think it is worth the inherent risk, especially considering this will end up in your pitch deck because it is a blue.
Yeah,
Um, Making that agility and that might token to present an attack afterwards, or even present anything really at all, even if it's just a mandible claw and an arsenal, that kind of thing. Um, is a fantastic way of saying, look, I'm making a bit of space. I have the potential to come at you for even more next turn. So unless you're hitting me for something hard, I'm probably going to hit you even harder, that kind of thing. Because it's not just the agility, it's the might too, right? This is
yeah,
essentially a zero cost one and whatever you value agility as, which could be kind of six if you think about it
yeah,
as a
a
second
lot.
attack. Exactly, yeah. So do you want to say this is a zero cost seven?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Maybe not.
at its ceiling, very possibly, right? And I mean,
Exactly.
even the might token, late game that you're in a heavy blocking scenario with your opponent, that could allow a claw to come in for 4. That's like a club, right?
Precisely. Exactly. That is almost as good as a club. The non attack can't be overstated in a format where we're probably expecting to see a lot more Kasai, a lot more
Yep.
Centauri Sabres, and probably a lot of Bolton as well, either with Sabres or without.
Let's talk dig up dinner quick before moving on to the sideboard.
Yeah, I hate this card. Um,
Why are you playing
inherently,
it then?
well, inherently, when it was released, I remember thinking I didn't like it very much, and
Yeah,
then I remember trying it desperately in club builds because obviously the one into the club for two means you're getting a little bit of value out of it and stuff. And still, I can't say I'm ultimately sold on it. But as I said, in a format where Kasai is going to be around a lot around the place, and there are decks that are going to actively be looking to fatigue you out of your options, digging up dinner is sometimes a way for you to still have a decent enough turn, sometimes get a bit of luck, and sometimes, quite importantly, reset your pitch stack.
yeah, 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 yeah. True.
I've had plenty of times where I've ended up with two reckless swings next to each other in a pitch stack. And dig up dinner comes along, and you go, you know what, we'll reset. Now, obviously, it's the old adage that if you play dig up dinner, you're just putting your blood rush bellows further below if you haven't already seen them. And whether or not that's true, maths is a fickle mistress. But for now, as I say, it feels part of that 2-2-2 core, along with the reckless swings, because I'm not playing three reckless swings. You can't make me. And the two smashbacks to fill in the gaps as well. I mean, for what it's worth, we did touch on it earlier, obviously, the added three costs and stuff of the deck. I believe in this list, I am running, is it 21 blues? Or was it
1, 2,
18? No, it is
3, 4,
18.
5, 6.
Yeah, so I'm running 18. So this isn't
Yeah,
the one with the 21s. But I have experimented with running maybe even far too many blues, really. And I got too used to playing KO, perhaps.
yeah,
But running, usually I was usually on 17 for the longest time, and up
yeah.
to 18 now. And again, maybe even pushing a bit more. We'll see. Like we could put a third smashback Elden in, for example. It ticks all the boxes, right, for like the traditional Rhiner school of thought. We've got our 15 yellows. We have our strong blue density as well. I think we're running like 36s, I think, in total, which
Right.
is enough for you to not really have to worry too much about,
Yep.
going like three turns without seeing a six to your blood rush, for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we're doing everything pretty by the book. I haven't really, broken out anything too crazy with the tech this time around. But then I don't think in the early days of testing that's really what we want to be doing. Like if we're taking this, for example, which I will be with you guys to Liverpool and maybe
Yep.
farming some side events on the CC. This is probably where I'd be starting, because
Yeah,
again,
for sure.
it's similar enough to what I'm playing with from before, and obviously we get to play with our new toys as well. Like I'm not going all in on the new stuff yet. I'm not playing Rainbow lead with speed or heck lead with power or anything like that. Not
Yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe in a couple of
Maybe.
weeks.
Right. Speaking of new tech, let's look at the sideboard. There's some interesting choices in here, and there's some pretty staple sideboard cards in here. You got your 6D reacts, you got your Command and Conquers, you got
hmm
your Arcane Barrier, you got the Gambler's Gloves, like we spoke about earlier. Talk to me a little bit about two Amnesia and
hmm
one Cadaverous Contraband.
So, way back when, back in my youth, back when Katsu was the deck to beat, I was an ardent fan of Rhinar into Katsu as a believer that, as someone who's played a lot of Katsu myself, you could block him out if you knew the lines well enough, and you could just fatigue him out. You can no longer do that as Rhinar. Bonds of Ancestry is a very strong card,
Yeah,
uh,
Bonds is
and
crazy.
and all you have to do is one damage snuck through by a particularly crafty ninja, and then your entire game plan goes down the hole, for lack
Yeah,
of a better phrase. You will leak 20 damage, and then your game plan of staying ahead on life to set up a big power turn is out the window. So Amnesia comes in as a fantastic way to use our new Apex Bone Breakers and force an attack through for 7, which
yeah,
says, if this hits, no Katsu for you. Um,
yeah.
no
I mean,
combo for you.
yeah,
Uh,
another card that really benefits from that extra 1 point up to the break point of 7, right?
Precisely. Because
Nice,
again,
nice.
even a 2 for 6, we don't mind. Obviously, if say we've cracked in agility and we have finals up, we're quite happy to pitch a blue into a claw and then float finals into an amnesia. Although I will say into Katsu, we're more likely to play heart and cross trap, which is down there. So in a real pinch, we can crack cross trap and just come back with an amnesia for 6 if we desperately want to. But I
Right.
wouldn't.
So
That's
let
not the intended
before
use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So before we move on to before we go on to Cadaverous Contraband, because I feel like a cross strap might be a little bit of a better talking point before going on to some more of the sideboard cards.
Mm.
Why would you bring in Heart and Cross Strap over Tunic?
So obviously, Tunic represents value over a long game, as we all know. And so the general maths of it is, if you think you're going to get more than 2 resources off of your Tunic, bring your Tunic. If you think a game is going to go longer than 6 turns, you bring your Final Spring Tunic. Because otherwise, having access to that Heart and Cross Trap means that your first Blood Rush is going to be a doozy, right?
Yep.
Regardless if you have the resources floating at the end of it, if I end up pitching my blue and obviously going into my blood rush, drawing 2 reds, having the 2 floating, I get to go Mandible Claw for 5, Mandible Claw for 5, and then pitch one of those reds in my hand, crack Heart and Crush Wrap, show no mercy from my arsenal, which is a pretty good turn. And into something like a ninja where you can't guarantee, well, you almost have a feeling that the game isn't going to go that long. If you can force a Katsu to block or you can force a Fire to block, you can usually wrap up that game quite nicely.
Sounds good. Let's go back to Cadaverous Contraband. Only one.
Only one. This is a pet favorite of mine from way back when. It used to be part of the main board as part of a more aggro build that I used to run back in the day. This does read on hit, put a Blood Rush Bellows back on top of your deck, which I think is quite powerful. Obviously, its key use is into aggro. Obviously, it seems a bit, strange to bring in a 2 block into aggro, but it fulfills that same sort of niche that Amnesia and a few of the other cards that sometimes you play in brute sideboards as well. These 2 cost attacks for 6 that now, obviously, as I said, with Bonebreaker, can become 7s and pose these pesky little on hits that otherwise brutes don't have access to. It also is for Dramai, because obviously, despite still being an incredibly favoured matchup for Rhinar, being able to just throw a Cadaverous Contraband at a dragon and take a Blood Blush and stick it back on top is
Yeah.
usually quite a nice turn. And obviously, with Prism now existing again, it's going to stick in the sideboard until I can really, really wrap up that matchup a bit more. Because smacking an angel for 6 and again resetting your blood rush isn't too bad.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if a lot of other aggro decks had a card that read, when this hits a hero, put your most powerful card in your deck back on top of your deck to play again the next turn, I think they
Exactly.
play that as well, right?
It's scary when they let it hit, of course, because it means they're probably holding lethal.
Yeah.
But it is a way for you to exert pressure, and it is a way for you to force blocks that otherwise Brute wouldn't have access to.
Cool. Let's talk about a couple more interesting choices. I just want to quick question. Going over the 0 for 4 D-Reacts, you're playing 6 0 for 4 D-Reacts, not playing any taller D-Reacts, no unmovables in the list?
No movables in the list. I do think even back before we were gifted the Bone Breakers, I
Mm.
was quite happy to keep just our 0 for 4s for matchups where our movable might see some use. Obviously, we're talking more about essentially Bravo, really,
Yeah,
in terms of the meta game at large. Where obviously it feels fantastic to just stop a crippling crush for 11 in its tracks with a red unmovable from Arsenal. The sink below usually does the job too. Sink below and a piece of equipment. Or I suppose now you're actually quite content to throw an untouched Apex and Scab Skins and a D React in front of it, and keep
yeah,
a
that's
four
nice.
card grip as well. You
Yeah.
can do some really fun things. I wouldn't say that Rhiner's matchup into Bravo was ever like horrendously favored in Rhiner's matchup. I've always felt comfortable in the matchup because
Mm.
of things like that. I do think Apex makes it a little bit nicer. But yeah, having these, I don't want to say they're a crutch, but they're definitely something I'm usually starting a deck with. I put them in the sideboard to make it seem like I'm not bringing them most matchups.
Well, you can't bring them into everything, right? They don't work into
Exactly.
they don't get too much value into everything. I mean, just like you said on the topic of the your Bravos, your Azaleas, these sorts of matchups where you're blocking equipment's really getting the getting some good value. I mean, I've been testing it in Levia last few days, and
Mhm.
it's doing some pretty good stuff for the Azalea matchup as well. The Bravo matchup was already pretty good, so very happy to have them in there for sure.
Mhm.
Command and Conquer staple sideboard disruption piece.
Pretty much. I mean, again, it is essentially a part of the main board. It's a six that's been in Rhino since it's been released. Like it was one of the few on hits that we had in Brute,
Yeah,
and still really is if you think about it. Obviously, in a deck like this where we're looking to maximize our blood rushes, it can sometimes feel a bit bad when you draw your command and conquer off your blood rush to go 5, 5, and 6. But 5, 5, and an on hit that can possibly disrupt an arsenal that maybe they've been holding on to disrupt the swing
yeah,
big instead, that kind of thing. It's
yeah,
never anything to scream about. And also, it is a way for you to just block efficiently and present disruption into those more aggressive decks that don't want to be throwing two cards under a card and want to be keeping their full four card grips.
yeah. Sometimes I might even have to put 3 cards under it
Well, with
if
the amount of two blocks going around,
yeah,
yeah, maybe.
yeah. E strike. What decks are this for?
It is increasingly becoming everything. This is increasingly becoming probably my favorite card to run in Rhino,
Yeah,
and obviously KO as well, where it's less of a well a
less of a
five
risk.
for lack of a
Yeah,
better phrase, but the ability, especially now with agility, to throw this out
yeah,
for go again and then drawing a card, or sometimes just the seven, lets you have some really just high damage turns and at really good rates, like being able
yeah,
to block out a little bit, like say throw a D react under an attack, and then go to your turn, crack an agility, E strike for seven into swing big for eight. That's a pretty good turn.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
I guess.
I used to love this card in Club Rhino when I used to
Hmm.
play some good Club Rhino games, and a lot of the time it was to trying to cheat out some extra value with your scab skins, right? Try and get that
Precisely.
2 AP, draw a card, do some nice stuff like that. But yeah, with the agility tokens now, I mean, that's just becoming increasingly more of a viable game
Increasingly
plan.
easy and more consistent to do, right?
Yeah,
Like obviously
yeah,
there are matchups where you're running your gambler's gloves anyway, and this is a way for you to, say for example, throw a five into a dragon or an angel and then start presenting damage at
yeah,
face. It's also a fantastic two card hand, right? It's two card seven.
yeah. Fixes clumpy red hands and stuff like that as well, right?
And does let you put perhaps a reckless swing to the bottom when it turns up a bit too early,
Yep,
or set up a blood rush bellows to finish a game with instead.
yep. Cool. We've also got 2 new cards. Take it on the chin
Hmm.
in here. What are these for? I think there's been a bit of talk about this card as well. I think it's proving itself to be
Yeah.
pretty powerful.
It is obviously blocking two on a card is never really anything to write home about when the rest of the deck really blocks three or pushing even four. However, that's not really why we're playing it. We're playing it because of that agility token. Starting to sound like a broken record over here, but we are playing
Well,
it
I
for
mean, it's
agility.
agility's one of our newest, biggest benefits out of heavy hitters, right? So
Yeah,
why not try and jam as much of it in there as we can, I guess.
yeah. And the fact that you get a little bit of damage off the top as well really does help. Obviously, it comes into matchups where otherwise you might struggle to fully block out big attacks or prevent damage on bigger attacks. Obviously, dominate, overpower, coming in, that kind of stuff too. Also, does a great job of blocking out a Kodachi as well. So ruining those master momentum turns for the ninjas does help too. It's a great card just to have parked in your arsenal and just sit and wait for a chance to just look at a 4 card grip and go, this could use an agility token.
Yeah, yeah,
And away we go. Obviously, also can bait out Command and Conquers, a la Sigil of Solace as well, obviously.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's all up. If it printed 3, I don't think, I mean, it'd be 3 in the main, I think.
It's like a. It's also got like a niche use case against Kano as well, right? It prevents
It does indeed.
2
Obviously,
arcane
Kano,
damage. Yeah,
a matchup that traditionally you'd expect a Rhino to have a decent matchup into. But
yeah,
again, as a Rhino player, I have lost my fair share of Wizard matchups. It does happen,
yeah,
unfortunately, to the best and, in my case, worst of us.
yeah.
Um, so this is a way for you to have a red that does also deal well. Essentially pitches for 2, right? And gives you
Yeah,
that agility token.
yeah.
Obviously, fantastic into wizards and any other forms of multiple arcane damage.
And
I was going to say Berserker,
attack reacts as well,
but
right?
yeah,
It's an instant. It gets over the.
yeah,
It gets yourself out of some trouble in niche scenarios. Thinking
yep,
things like breaking scales, maybe
hmm
some Bolton tricks, some things like that, right?
yep.
Seems
Isn't
pretty good.
an action card, so gets around Bolton. Obviously, gets around Reprise. Gets around all kinds of funny little things that otherwise your small brute mind shouldn't have to comprehend.
And you can just take it on the chin and
Just
move
take
on.
it on the
Yeah.
chin. Also, you get to say that. You can say, "Yeah, I'll take that on the chin." Um,
Couple more cards. We've got one Arc Smash, one Remembrance. Just filling out some little toolkit uses in
Pretty
the
much.
card deck.
Obviously, these are cards that I've had in my sideboard for Rhino decks, going back a long way now. Obviously, R Smash for that chance that you do bump into a dash, and you go fantastic. If they're playing pistol, my R Smash will blow up their pistol pieces. If they're not, it will block a matchup that could go either way, really.
Yeah.
I found obviously a lot of dashes more recently have foregone the pistol package and are quite happy to just go full boost. But it's
Yeah.
always there, right? Just in case of emergencies.
I mean, you can always draw it turn one when they've started with a Teclo Pounder or an induction chamber or
Yeah, and you're
something
happy
like
with
that,
anything.
right?
And the thing is, it's getting more and more niche use as well. Like I've been bringing it into Kasai's, I've been bringing it into Boltons, I've been bringing it into these other matchups where sometimes just having a non-attack action is useful. Obviously, it's really funny to blow up some gold. Like if you get left a hand into a victor, which obviously is a deck that wants to clash with you, and
Yeah.
as far as brutes go, I'd say Ryan's probably the worst clasher, but you still win your fair share of clashes into Victor. So he wants to use that gold to reset his clashes. If you blow up that gold, he has to earn it back, right? And he
Yeah,
has to earn
yeah.
it back the hard way. So it does a good job there. Obviously, it can break copper and it can break gold in Kasai decks as well. Um, you can use it for all kinds of stuff too, but fundamentally, having a 3 card, a 3 block non-attack action is quite handy in those matchups too.
Yeah, 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 for sure. And Remembrance?
Remembrance is, yeah, again, for those decks where you think that maybe 3 blood rushes won't be enough. So this used to be old him tech.
Yeah,
I say, rest in peace, old man. This used to be how you'd beat old him. You'd obviously get your first 3 blood rushes through. Usually as doubles, you go double blood rush, and
yeah.
then try and set up your second double blood rush because that's the only way you're pushing damage through a crown of seeds and a rampart.
Yeah. I mean, this
Now
is pretty good into was pretty good into Big Dragon Dromai as well, right?
Precisely into decks like decks that only real way they're going to push the game into you is through decking you out.
Yeah.
Is it is the means of doing so. So some of the new prisms that are popping up are doing their
Yeah.
best to just grind you out of resources and then finish you off. Obviously, Dramai will try and do that if you don't, beat them to dust first. Victor will try to do so, but again, usually through intimidate, you're able
You're
to
pretty
mitigate some
safe.
of that. But
Yeah.
it never hurts to have, right?
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, I mean, unless you want to touch on anything else, we've got AB3 in the board as well. We spoke about the Hot and Cross Trap. Do you want to talk any more about Gamblers and Apex Bonebreaker?
I could talk about them for hours. I
Yeah,
really
true.
could.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it is. I mean, at the moment, I'm bringing Apex for everything. Pretty much, I'm
Wow.
trying to test it into everything, trying to find where it's really shining and where perhaps the gamblers would be more beneficial. like I said, I'm bringing Apex into Bravo as it speaks. There's possibility of bringing Gamblers into Bravo instead, just to keep pushing those high damage turns. Fundamentally, you will always need Gamblers gloves for Illusionists, though. You will always need Gamblers gloves for Prism should you turn up.
Yep.
Otherwise, you won't be able to get around to those ALSs. Well, you will if you're very lucky and very brave, I
Yeah.
suppose. But
And sometimes that's the brute way.
yeah, it is the brute way. It is, and I wish it wasn't.
Yeah.
But no, fundamentally, I do think that we are in a very good spot with Bonebreaker, and obviously with
Yep.
the new cards that have been printed as well. I've obviously seen a lot of the tier lists going around, putting Rhinar, OKO usually quite consistently, which I think you can understand why a lot of new brute players are looking at these decks and going, well, this KO deck pretty much pilots itself. This is
Yeah.
this is easy, which is true. He is very strong fundamentally. However, I do think it does overlook some of the things that only Rhinar can do, and some of the benefits that only Rhinar does get. So it'll be
Uh,
very interesting to see where things go after we see some actual new CC played. I'm pretty sure this weekend we've got Hartford, isn't it?
yeah, I think
TCG
Hartford
Hartford,
is a sealed event, a sealed
Hartford
calling, I
US,
think,
not Hartford
possibly.
UK, of
Yeah.
course.
And then the following weekend, we are in Liverpool. Massively, massively looking forward to that. Playing some more sealed. Really enjoyed sealed over the weekend, just gone for our pre-releases. Guys, thank you so much for the support on the previous video. We are over the moon with how that video did. So again, thank you everyone who checked that one out. Toby, we're going to put the deck in the description below if that's cool with you.
Yep.
And yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching the video. Toby, any last words?
Honestly, I never thought Brute would get this much support. I'm just chuffed to bits.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Me too. All right, guys, signing off. Thanks very much.